Hey guys, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about the history of Beyblade. So with the launch of Beyblade X, we have hit the 25th anniversary, which is huge. The series is almost as old as Pokemon, and it has kept a grip on me since I was a child, and there is a lot of history that people don't know. So over the course of the next several videos, we're going to be going in depth on a complete history of Beyblade from conception to where we are at today. This first video is mainly going to be covering sort of what led into the creation of Beyblade, as well as some of the things that inspired it and some of the lesser known facts about the early development and history of Beyblade. So grab a snack, strap in, and let's get started. So before we get too steeped into the Beyblade history, I want to talk a little bit about the company that actually created it. So Takara, prior to merging with Tomy and becoming Takara Tomy, was established in 1955. They had some pretty big properties that are still going today, including Diaclone and Microman Micro Change toys, which were later rebranded by Hasbro as Transformers. Obviously, Transformers are still around today. It is a very big toy line and franchise, had many movies. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with that. So in the mid to late 80s, Takara had success with some of these what would be really big flagship franchises like Transformers. In the 90s, Takara also developed and published video games in-house. One of the ports they did actually was Fatal Fury, which is pretty cool. They had some other games under their belt as well. However, during the early 90s, there was a shift in toy culture in Japan, with kids being increasingly more interested in customizable toy lines, as well as the whole monster craze that was brought on by Pokemon. Mini 4-Wheel Drive is a good example of a franchise at the time that definitely had some influence on Beyblade. It is a customizable racing slot car, basically. It had been around since the 80s, but with the release of Let's and Go, the popularity in the 90s skyrocketed, and of course Takara wanted to try to capitalize on that sort of concept. In the early to mid-90s, Takara obtained the licensing rights to produce toys for Bomberman, which is an insanely huge gaming franchise in Japan, one that I'm sure most people have probably played at some point or another, but probably haven't invested much time into. You may be wondering why I'm going off on a Bomberman tangent, but trust me, this all leads back to Beyblade. So the initial licensed toys were Bomberman, B-Daman, and they've just shot marbles. There was no customization or anything like that. It was just a licensed Bomberman toy. But Takara had started to develop a new toy line based off of a spin-off of Bomberman called Bomberman Bakugaiden. So in 1997, Bomberman Bakugaiden launched. This originally ran in CoroCoro in 1997 and adopted the later art style for Bomberman from Shoji Mizuno, which, remember this name because this is an important one. This guy also previously had worked on Arcadia of my youth, also known as Space Pirate Captain Harlock. Captain Harlock is iconic in its own right. If you're not familiar with it, I strongly suggest you look into it. But this guy is also credited in creating the more sleeker design of Bomberman that was adopted for Bomberman Bakugaiden. Bomberman Bakugaiden ended up being a pretty popular series. It had some customization with the toy line, but it didn't quite hit the market that I think Takara was intending it to. If the later toy lines for Bomberman Bakugaiden look strikingly similar to B-Daman, well, you're not far off, because that's basically what they are, which segues into our next Takara venture, which is Super B-Daman. The manga for Super B-Daman was also published in CoroCoro, and still retains some of the Bomberman influences in the manga early on. You see some of the characters using Bomberman B-Daman, but this later transitions into sort of its own identity, with the Bomberman looking unique and separate from the Bomberman universe. The manga was fairly popular, running for 15 volumes over 6 years. There was an anime that ran for 18 episodes, but it didn't continue after that and ended its run in 1999. ironically about the time that Beyblade launched. And while the series was popular and definitely checked a lot of the boxes that I think Takara was looking for, it didn't have the staying power I think it needed, especially at the time with the popularity of Pokemon a couple years earlier and things emerging like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Digimon, and Monster Rancher. So, with the popularity of B-Daman dwindling, Takara needed to come up with something new that would not only compete with these flagships that were just emerging like Pokemon and Digimon with their monster themes, but also the customizable toy lines like Mini 4-Wheel Drive, which still had a grip on the child populace of Japan. During the Bomberman Bakugaiden era, Takara had toyed around with a battling spinning top spin-off of Bomberman, but it wasn't particularly successful. However, this did lay the groundwork for Takara to go back and take a look at Beigoma, which historically was a very popular, very old traditional game that was played in Japan. So from what I can gather, Osamu Mushimo was the one that was fleshing out the idea of a customizable battling top, trying to incorporate some of the things that they had learned from the Bomberman franchise, Super Beydaman, as well as trying to incorporate some ideas from what was popular at the time, being things like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. Shoji Mizuno would be tasked with creating some character designs for this new concept. These character designs would be Tyson, Kai, and Jin. These would be handed off to Hudson to create a Game Boy game to go along with the release of these toys. Takao Aoki is often credited for being the one who created Takao, Jin, and Kai, but it was Shoji Mizuno who actually initially designed these characters. Additionally, some of the framework for the story that was adopted into the manga was taken from the actual video game itself. Like I said, the game was developed by Hudson, who had worked previously with Takara on some other licensed games, including Bomberman Bakugaiden and Super Beydaman for both the Game Boy and the Super Famicom. This game definitely borrows heavily from Pokemon. You can definitely see the inspirations. It's said that the design for Takao or Tyson was borrowed heavily from the character Red from Pokemon, and it definitely looks like it. This game shares, like I said, a lot of similarities, including the ability to obtain Bit Beasts, which are sort of the Beyblade equivalent to Pokemon. There's over 100 in the game that you can collect and raise that have different special abilities or different special moves. It's a really interesting concept, and they did a lot in this game that unfortunately got lost during the transition from the game to the manga and then the anime. I really do wish at some point we will get a English patch for this game. I think it would be great. The game is very interesting. Unfortunately, it wasn't super popular at launch. No official guide was ever released, and there isn't even a full fan guide, even on the Japanese side of things. The game is just not that well explored, but it is very interesting. At World Hobby Fair in Japan, you could obtain a super rare event limited Dragoon, which is the sort of modernized version of Dragoon. It was the only way to get it. Think of it as sort of the Mew of Beyblade. I would love to get my hands on it at some point, but that is the video game. So the video game and the first 3 Beyblades were released in 1999 at World Hobby Fair in Japan. Tyson's Beyblade, Ultimate Dragoon, Kai's Frostic Dronzer, and Jin's Saizo were all released to lukewarm reception. The series actually wasn't that popular when it dropped. It took a little while for the series to gain steam. The manga was later published, and then the anime, and then things started really taking off. But we're gonna get to that in the next episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button, drop a comment letting me know if you learned anything in this video that you didn't already know. Subscribe for future Beyblade videos, including the continuation of this history series, and I will see you all in the next one.